Good afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year, and welcome to the January meeting of the Academic Council. I hope all of you continue to be well and safe and had a good start of the semester yesterday. And I hope you also got a chance to get some rest and relaxation during the winter break. We had a long, tough first semester, so I hope the break was good to you. Before we begin with our formal agenda, I have a few announcements. In late December, Jack Bovender, chair of our Board of Trustees, sent a message that he asked me to share with you. Jack wrote, "Carrie, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, please pass on to ECAC and the Academic Council our profound appreciation for the efforts of the faculty and its leadership in making the semester so successful. The cooperative partnership between ECAC, Academic Council, and the administration was a key component of Duke's successful navigation through the semester, providing the rest of higher education with the best example of how to manage a health crisis." That's from Jack Bovin, the Board of our Trustees. Thank Jack for that acknowledgement of our efforts throughout the semester. And again, thank you for all that you did and all of our colleagues did in making this semester, last semester so successful. And I hope this semester is as successful as last. I want to remind you of the leadership conversations that President Price and his leadership team are conducting in the next few weeks. The faculty staff leadership conversation will be January 25th at 3:30. So please, if you can, attend that conversation. Next is the approval of the minutes from our November the 19th meeting. These minutes were posted with the agenda on Sakai. Are there any corrections or questions regarding the minutes? Hearing none, we'll consider these approved. Next is the presentation from the AC Chair Nominating Committee. Professor Victoria Szabo from Art History and Visual Studies, also a recent member of ECAC, is the chair of the nominating committee, and she'll come now and present the committee's report. Victoria.
Thanks, Carrie, and Happy New Year, everyone. According to the bylaws of the Academic Council, any member of the university faculty is eligible to be considered for our chair. The bylaws indicate that the Executive Committee of Academic Council shall appoint a nominating committee to nominate 2 persons to run for chair. In addition, additional nominations can be heard from the floor during this meeting. The nominating committee met last fall. I was the chair. The other members were Claudia Gunsch from Civil and Environmental Engineering and Associate Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, Thea Portier-Young from Divinity, Joseph Winters from Religious Studies and African American Studies, and Manoj Mohanan from Stanford Economics and Global Health. The committee began by reviewing the criteria and duties of the Academic Council chair with initial input and guidance from the wise Sandra Walton, our administrative coordinator, and the current chair of Academic Council, Carrie Haney. The chair of Academic Council, as you know, convenes and chairs these meetings, but that's the tip of the iceberg. The chair also convenes and chairs the weekly meetings of ECAC, serves as ex officio member on the University Priorities Committee, Global Priorities Committee, Academic Programs Committee, a Board of Trustees subcommittee, and a member of other committees, including probably committees on committees. Twice a year, the chair reports to the Board of Trustees on the activities of our council. The chair has regular contact and conversations with the president, provost, and executive vice president. Chair serves as the university faculty marshal, participating in undergraduate and graduate convocation, Founders Day, baccalaureate, and commencement ceremonies. The chair also meets and frequently with members of the faculty, students, and administration to bring a wide range of topics to the chair, seeking faculty's perspective or guidance. As you can tell, the job of chair is an always challenging one. Those of us who've served on ECAC get just a glimpse of that. And it's even more so now in the time of COVID, at a time of social and political unrest and miscommunication, of increasing awareness of ongoing social justice issues, of economic insecurity, and of accelerating changes in the shape and conduct of higher education. With that expansive portfolio in mind, we were looking for someone who had proven campus leadership and administrative experience, who could both work with senior leadership effectively and listen to and represent the concerns of the faculty across the various programs, disciplines, and schools, who's inclusive and collaborative, yet willing to be challenged or give challenge when necessary, who shares the anti-racist commitments and values of our institution and carries them forward in their work, who has an understanding of institutional finances and their complexities, and of course, someone who upholds the core Duke values of respect, trust, inclusion, discovery, and excellence in their words and deeds. In thinking about the ideal characteristics for a chair, it sounds like we went in search of a unicorn. Fortunately, as this process is highlighted for me, the members of our committee, we're extremely lucky to live and work amongst such inspiring, accomplished, and dedicated colleagues, and among them, some who are ready to take up the mantle of institutional leadership and service, and even in these uniquely challenging times. The two candidates that the nominating committee presents today as our potential next chair for Academic Council are Erica Weinthal and Lawrence Zelenak. Erica Weinthal is a professor of environmental policy and public policy in the Nicholas School of the Environment. She received her BA from Oberlin College and a PhD in political science from Columbia University. She holds secondary appointments in the Sanford School of Public Policy, in the International Comparative Studies program, and at Duke Kunshan University. From 2012 to 17, she served as the Associate Dean for International Programs in the Nicholas School, where she collaborated on the International Masters of Environmental Policy for DKU. She's a member of the Bass Society of Fellows and co-directs the Duke Human Rights Center at the FHI. Broadly, her research focuses on global environmental politics and environmental peace building. Her current work is on the targeting of civilian infrastructure and humanitarian action in the wars in the Middle East and North Africa. She's taught undergrad, graduate, and professional students, taught in the Focus and Basque Connections programs, and helped create a MOOC on environmental security and sustaining peace with the UN Environment Program. Over her past 15 years at Duke, she served on Academic Council and ECAC, including as vice chair in 2018 and 19. She was chair of the Global Priorities Committee in 2016 to 18 and has served on the Board of Trustees Task Force on Activating the Global Network and related committees, as well as the Africa Initiative and the Global Health Institute Executive Committee. She's also served on the Duke Task Force and various committees on hate and bias, the Faculty Diversity Standing Committee, and the AB Duke Fellowship Committee, amongst others. Lawrence Zelenak is the Pamela B. Gann Professor of Law. Zelenak received his BA summa cum laude from the University of Santa Clara and his JD magna cum laude from Harvard Law School. His publications include numerous articles on a wide range of tax policy issues and a casebook and a treatise on federal income tax regulation of individuals. His books include Figuring Out the Tax, Congress, Treasury, and the Design of the Early Modern Income Tax from Cambridge, and Learning to Love Form 1040, gotta read that one. 2 cheers for the returns-based mass income tax. Prior to joining Duke Law School in 2003, Zelenak was a member of the faculty of Columbia Law School. Earlier, he was faculty member at the University of North Carolina School of Law, professor in residence at the Office of Chief Counsel of the Internal Revenue Service, an assistant professor at the Lewis and Clark Law School, and an associate with the Seattle law firm of Lesord and Patton. He has also been a visiting professor at the University of Utah and Northwestern University Law School. Larry has served many terms as a member of the Academic Council and 2 terms in 2010 to 12 and 17 to 19 as a member of the Executive Committee of the Academic Council. In 2019, he chaired the search committee for Duke's Vice President for Institutional Equity and Chief Diversity Officer. He has also chaired the Faculty Hearing Committee. Well, I hope this brief overview gives you just a little sense of the kind of commitment and service that both of these wonderful colleagues have shown to our faculty and our broader community. I speak personally when I say, as a member of ECAC with both of them, that I think they would both do a fantastic job. You can learn more about these candidates from their bios in the ballot. Speaking for the nominating committee, we firmly believe that faculty governance at Duke will be in good hands, whatever the outcome of the election. Please join me in thanking Erica and Larry for agreeing to serve as candidates for chair. At this time, the committee also welcomes any nominations from the floor. All right, not seeing any nominations, I will pass the virtual baton back to you, Carrie.
Thank you, Victoria, and thanks to members of the nominating committee for your hard work in bringing us 2 excellent candidates as you described, Victoria. I want to appreciate and thank Larry and Erica both for agreeing to stand for election. The election will take place the week of January 25th. Faculty members who are eligible to vote are current members of the Academic Council. Those who are serving 2020-2021 term are eligible to vote. So look out for that ballot next week, and the bios will be posted with the ballot the week of the 25th of January. Thanks, Victoria. Next, we'll have a presentation from Kevin White, Vice President and Director of Duke Athletics. Kevin has been Director of Athletics and Vice President since 2008. And as you might have noticed, about a week ago, Kevin announced his retirement from Duke, effective this coming August. The Duke Today article about his retirement details Kevin's many accomplishments during his 47 years in intercollegiate athletics. Let me highlight just a few of these. Under Kevin's leadership, Duke has captured 8 NCAA championships and 23 Atlantic Coast Conference titles. Kevin has also been a champion of student athletes' intellectual development and academic success. The Duke Today story mentions that for the 2019 and 2020 academic year, 24 of 27 Blue Devil varsity teams earned grade point averages of 3.0 or better for the fall and spring semesters. 24 or 27 of our varsity teams. And Duke established a new league record with 570 ACC honor roll selections. 570 ACC honor roll selections. That's amazing. During Kevin's tenure, Duke has consistently been at or near the top of the NCAA's graduation success rate and academic performance rate reports. So as I turn the meeting over to Kevin and his team, please join me with a round of applause and an extension of our gratitude to Kevin for his leadership of Duke Athletics and his commitment to Duke University. Thank you, Kevin. Let me also thank Kevin and his team for the care and attention they gave our student athletes. They've given our student athletes during the pandemic, and especially during the December break when some of us were getting rest, they were still on the job taking care of our athletes who were in competition. Kevin, I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce the rest of your team. Is Kevin here?
Carrie, this is Martha Vitalis, the faculty athletic rep, and I think Nina and Kevin thought they were on starting at 3:48. So they may come on shortly if they're not here already. I was just eager to be part of the meeting slideshow.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I said all that those nice things about Kevin, and he's not even here. So we'll have to send him the minutes to make sure that he gets updated on those nice things. But it has been a tremendous run for Duke Athletics under Kevin's leadership, and he's led a tremendous team. And we'll have big shoes to fill, Mr. President, as we think about a replacement and a search for a replacement. But it's been a wonderful run, and we are at the top of the heap when it comes to success on and off the field in athletics, and we all should be grateful for that. And I should add, scandal-free.
Yes.
And that's extremely important these days.
Well, I'll just jump in since we have a minute or two. Just to echo what you said, Carrie, working with Kevin these years has been terrific. He's a wonderful partner to everyone across the university. We will have a thoughtful process. He's given us time with this transition. For all the reasons you described, Carrie, we will enter this market with an opportunity to bring the very best talent to Duke. And I'm confident that Kevin has brought this program to a point where we'll have enormous success. So I'm personally going to be missing Kevin. He'll still be around and still be a colleague and available for advice, which will be quite useful to all of us. But I wanted to extend just my personal gratitude for everything he's done over these years. Absolutely terrific work on behalf of Duke and Duke Athletics.
Yes, thank you. I see Brad here. Is the rest of the team? Is Kevin?
Yeah, Dr. Haney, I am here and thank you very much for your wonderful, uh, overly, terribly, ridiculously generous comments and also to President Price. But I am here. Shall I kind of get us moving
Yes.
on the athletics piece?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, it's great to be with all of you today as we wrap up. I guess this is day 2 of the spring semester. Again, Dr. Haney, thank you very much for the kind invitation to bring our team to this group today.
Kevin, if you call me Dr. Haney one more time, I'm gonna pull back the invitation. Carrie,
Okay, I'll be careful. We have been, yeah, well, first, let me just say briefly, I want to give you a sense at the beginning here of the student athlete sentiments relative to the COVID impact and or better said response here at Duke. You know, we have been visiting, as you would suspect we would be, regularly across all organizational dimensions within athletics, via teams, units, departments, as well as individual meetings with all the freshmen. All of which, I promise you, all of which unsolicitedly express their sincere appreciation for Duke's management of the virus, allowing them to practice and compete, which is very, very important to our cohort of 740 student athletes. To be sure, as I attend practices and privileged to attend practices and competitions, this is the constant response relative to all, again, Duke student athletes, as well as the immediate athletics community. Their deep appreciation extends to all of us within Duke University, beginning with President Price, including Kyle Kavanaugh, Jennifer Francis, and our very own athletics COVID czar, Bob Weissman, whom you'll hear from in just a little bit. Bottom line, the athletics department has adopted basically 3 themes since March, and we've really worked hard and have been really true to these themes. Theme 1, communication. Theme 2, connectivity. And theme 3, positivity. Those 3 objectives have been non-negotiable, and you combine those with all the articulated protocols, mitigation strategies, and such. That's what's gotten Duke athletics, at least to this point in the academic year. Last fall, we presented updates to the executive committee of the Board of Trustees on multiple occasions, conducted a session with the full board back in December, and provided a presentation to the Athletics Council in late November. Today, we'll give you maybe the highlights of those presentations with updated and current information. You should know that we have a highly talented, skilled, just an exceptional leadership team with whom I'm terribly honored and privileged to be associated. Several of them will be joining us here today for this presentation, and they will very briefly provide remarks for their respective areas before we open the floor up for any questions that you may have. So with that, Nina King is our Senior Deputy Director of Athletics for Administration and Legal Affairs and Chief of Staff. Nina's got lots of jobs here and will serve as our air traffic controller today and provide you with a roadmap of how we'll spend the time we have together, and we'll try to be pretty darn efficient. Once again, we know you have a pretty extensive agenda. Once again, we appreciate the invitation to be here, Carrie, and very best wishes for a successful spring semester to the entire faculty and the academic community. So with that, Nina King.
Kevin, thanks. Air traffic controller is one of my favorites. So Dr. Haney, appreciate the time you've given us today. It's good to be here with everyone. As we kick things off, I'm going to briefly give you a diversity and engagement update. And then as we go along, I'll introduce my colleagues to give brief updates relative to their areas of responsibilities. So first, diversity and engagement. Just wanted to let you know some of the things happening within Duke Athletics since last summer through the present. So for context, close to 19% of our athletics staff are people of color, and 35% of our student athlete population identify in underrepresented groups. So in June, the student athlete group, United Black Athletes, worked with our athletics staff to create a Black Justice Summit. The summit was a platform for our student athletes, our coaches and staff to discuss racial injustice in America and how we could all work together towards change. It was really a great session filled with meaningful dialogue and the start to the creation of actionable steps that as an athletics community we could take together. So since June, we've seen increased participation in engagement in United Black Athletes. We've created a Black staff group that meets regularly for fellowship, connection, education. We've created a mentorship program for Black student athletes and Black staff members, again, to build connectivity between our student athletes and our staff members. In late August, you may have seen our student athletes held a peaceful protest out in Kville, conversations on campus in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. And many of our teams have hosted team engagement activities, reading books together, watching movies, documentaries around the themes of social justice or education on issues relative to race. Lastly, we're in the process of creating the Duke Athletics Diversity Engagement Working Group, which will be comprised of staff members as well as student athletes. And that group will focus on 4 areas: community outreach, awareness and education programs, celebration of diversity, and recruitment, hiring, and retention. Within that recruitment, hiring, and retention area, the goal is to create an athletics policy that will ensure that every candidate pool for every position within athletics is a diverse one. And via that policy, we're going to be reinforcing our commitment to continuing to build a diverse employee demographic. That 19% number of our staff is progress from where we were 10 years ago. We have our first 3 Black head coaches in wrestling, softball, and most recently women's basketball. But we're not resting because we've got work to do to continue to increase those numbers. So that's the brief diversity and engagement update relative to athletics. Now I'm going to kick it over to Troy Austin, our Senior Associate Athletic Director for Internal Operations. And one of the areas he oversees is behavioral health. And so we've asked Troy if he would kind of give us a quick mental health update on student athletes.
Yeah, thank you, Nina, and good afternoon, everyone. In 2018, Duke Athletics established a behavioral health unit as a lot of universities were grappling with the rise in issues and awareness of mental health illnesses in their student population. We were fortunate to hire Dr. Sean Zeppelin from Auburn University, who's done a fantastic job in building a foundation for that program. Not just working with internal and athletics, he's also started to develop quality partnerships across campus with Duke Reach, with CAPS that have provided great benefits for our student athletes. In fact, in 2019, Sean and Martha worked together as leadership to create the first mental health summit in the ACC. So really have made some big gains early. The student athlete population, just kind of reflecting on impact, once they realized they had this resource, have steadily gotten involved with Sean, and he's kind of played air traffic controller in kind of triaging student athletes. As you can imagine, with the pandemic, the usage rate and the visits have increased, but we've been tracking the student athletes throughout the summer and feel like in terms of issues of anxiety and loneliness, they've started to level off and improve within the student athlete population. Moving forward, you may have seen the news about the very generous gift we receive to build out behavioral health, and we feel like that will help us provide additional resources to move our program from kind of a firefighting mode where we're just doing visits to a fire prevention mode where we're educating student athletes about peer-to-peer recognition, educating coaches about how to manage student athletes with behavioral health issues. So it's really a program that has grown quickly for us and paid big dividends. So Thank you for that. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Troy. Next up, we'll have Heather Ryan, who is our Associate Athletic Director within Academic Services, and she's also our Senior Woman Administrator working with most of our Olympic sports this year.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to echo Kevin's comments. I work daily with our student athletes and their academic experience, and they've been overwhelmingly complimentary of our faculty and our staff and their fall academic experience. And for a time that was full of anxiety with online learning and transitioning to, back and forth to online classes, they were very complimentary of their experience. So we appreciate that. I thought it'd be helpful to give a brief recap of the fall and share our plans for our athletic teams this semester. As you may know, in August, the NCAA voted to move fall sport championships to the spring. So that means the championships for cross country, volleyball, men's and women's soccer, field hockey will all be this April. As a conference, the ACC, with input and guidance from the medical advisory group, they felt that competition could be held safely with proper mitigation in place. And so they chose to move forward with fall competitions on a limited scale. So fall schedules were constructed to reduce travel as much as possible, but provide a meaningful student athlete experience, which led to playing local schools multiple times and having off weeks built into competition schedules. And in the fall, we successfully completed abbreviated seasons in all of our fall sports, volleyball, field hockey, men's and women's soccer, and cross country. And these fall sports will continue to compete in the spring. Moving to winter and spring, winter sports, fencing, indoor track and field, swimming and diving, and wrestling are currently competing, and spring sports will start their competition soon. Priorities for spring sports included minimizing travel and maximizing competition opportunities. These sports, you may remember, were canceled last year before competition even started. So schedules were created in a way that allowed them to compete as much as possible this year, obviously prioritizing health and safety. I think for this group, it's important to note that because the NCAA moved the fall championships to the spring, this will be the first time ever we've had 26 of our 27 sports competing in one semester. This is important for this group to hear because, and I hope you will take this back to your departments, because student athletes will have travel letters, but it would be helpful for our faculty to hear this from you as well. I know some faculty may be caught off guard when they receive a travel letter from our fall sports. The key to our achieving success and everything we've been able to do is collaborating with campus and others and remaining flexible. Our campus and athletic administrators, as well as our student athletes, have done an amazing job pivoting and making changes as necessary. And support from Dr. Price and the university has been instrumental in our success. And that's the update.
Great. Thanks, Heather. Up next, we've got Mitch Mosier, our Deputy Athletic Director for Resource Acquisition and our Chief Financial Officer, to give us a brief financial update. Mitch.
Thanks, Nina. Good afternoon. The past 8 months, as you can well imagine, have been a whirlwind of financial scenario planning and implementation of mitigation strategies. So this afternoon, I'd like to take you through a very high-level overview of the planning process to date, where we currently stand, and look at the impacts that may still be out there that we may be vulnerable to. There were 3 goals that we underscored when our planning started last April. The first was to anticipate or plan ahead. As much as possible, we wanted to stay ahead of the game rather than waiting until it was too late to implement meaningful mitigation strategies. Second, all decisions were made with the mindset towards the best interest of our student athletes, Duke Athletics, and Duke University. And our third premise was to make every effort to keep our student athlete support systems intact and not have to scale those back. Our initial planning process last April focused on 3 scenarios back when we didn't have a lot of information. The first was a quasi-normal, which looked at basketball and football primarily playing full seasons with minimal alteration. Of course, that didn't happen. Then there was a middle ground, which assumed that football season was delayed and shortened, and basketball would be played with limited fans until January. And finally was an extreme scenario that dealt with the cancellation of football and significant alteration to basketball season. So fast forward to mid-June, we developed a bus stop analogy, or a staged approach to look at the best case financial scenario at any one moment in time. We rolled out our first bus stop, or bus stop one plan, to the department and to the senior leadership of the university in mid-June. And at that time, we were using the assumptions that led to a projected $16.5 million loss of revenue. Those assumptions were a residual loss of revenue from the NCAA men's basketball tournament last spring, football playing a full schedule with reduced capacity, and basketball playing a full schedule with reduced capacity until January. And then there was the anticipated impact on philanthropy. The mitigation strategies that we implemented at that time were a reduction in financial aid expense. We reduced non-compensation operating budgets by 15%, and we had multiple salary and fringe strategies that we implemented, highlighted by a sliding scale salary reduction for all employees making over $50,000 a year. In mid-September, we rolled out Bus Stop 2, and the assumptions that we used at that time were that football would play a 10+1 season. We knew that at that point. And at that time, we were still hopeful that basketball would have fans starting in January. The projected residual loss of revenue at that time was $4.5 million, bringing our aggregate loss to about $21 million. The mitigation strategies we used at Bus Stop 2 were to further reduce non-compensation operating budgets by another 10%, and we implemented a targeted fundraising campaign entitled More Than a Game, which has generated more than $1 million to date. In fact, probably closer to $1.5 million. At this bus stop, we did not implement anything further with regard to compensation reductions. Currently, we are at Bus Stop 3, where we have no fans in basketball, and we're not anticipating that we'll have any special events for the remainder of the school year. This resulted in an additional $16 million of lost revenue, bringing our aggregate total to $36 million. We've been working with Dr. Price, worked with Tallman prior to his departure, Daniel Ennis and Rachel Satterfield, on additional strategies, and the strategies we've already implemented to deal with the loss of revenue. And like our peers and other departments across campus, we stand ready to cash out the remainder of quasi-endowment and take other actions as necessary to deal with the remainder of the lost revenue. If necessary, there could be a Bus Stop 4 in March. This will occur if basketball season gets further interrupted and there's an impact to television revenue, or if for some reason we don't have an ACC or NCAA men's basketball tournament again this year. Above all, we want to remain nimble. We want to constantly monitor and revise our scenarios and communicate as much as possible with our staff internally within our department and with the university senior administration. Nina?
Thanks, Mitch. All right, next up we have Chris Kennedy, Senior Deputy Athletic Director, who will give us an update on Title IX and academic performance.
Thank you, Nina. Very brief updates on Title IX and graduation success rate. The graduation success rate is an NC2A figure, GSR, which calculates, obviously, the graduation rate of student athletes. The NC2A arrives at this figure by taking out students who left the university in good standing. So if somebody transfers to another institution while in good standing, or if they leave early to pursue a professional career, they don't count against your GSR figures. So in the most recent GSR report from the NC2A, Duke tied with Notre Dame and Northwestern to lead the country with an overall GSR rate of 98%. 17 teams were at 100%, and all the rest of the teams were all in the 90s. People are always interested in football. Football led the country, tied with Northwestern at 97%. And this is a testament to our academic support program, but more so to the very careful admissions process that Christoph and his staff operate, and to the students themselves who choose to come here and challenge themselves in this academic and athletic environment. Title IX. 5 years ago, we developed a Title IX plan, and based on the Office of Civil Rights gives you 3 ways to comply with Title IX, 3 alternatives. And the first of them, known as prong 1, we refer to as proportionality. So that if the underrepresented gender in the undergraduate student body is, say, 45%, then the underrepresented gender in athletics should be getting 45% of the financial aid and 45% of the participation opportunities. As I say, 5 years ago, we developed a gender equity Title IX plan that called for us to add 20 scholarships in women's sports that weren't at the full NC2A limits for scholarships. The NCAA tells you how many scholarships you can give in each sport. And those were distributed among swimming, fencing, and rowing, with 1 or 2 going to women's track. In addition, we added a 27th sport, softball, which gives us another 12 scholarship opportunities and helps us with that proportionality number. So we're required to file reports to the NC2A and to the government every year. And in the latest, and we're at the 5 years out, we're at the full implementation of this Title IX plan. So the latest NC2A sports sponsorship report, which we turned in late fall, and the Government Equity Athletics Disclosure Act form show that 50% of the Duke undergraduate student body is female. 49% of athletic aid goes to female student athletes. So we're very comfortable with that. You know, you don't actually know whether you're in or out of compliance with Title IX until the OCR tells you, but we're very confident with those numbers that if anybody should file a complaint, I can't imagine on what basis, that we can come to a satisfactory resolution of that. I should also just add that in their 3rd season last year, when the season was cut off, softball was 23-4 and ranked in the top 25. So that's been a successful launch. And I'd just like to mention one other thing as a transition to Bob Wiseman's explanation of our COVID response. Early on in the summer last year, we decided that if any student athletes were not comfortable participating, that they could opt out without consequence. That is, they wouldn't lose their athletic financial aid. They'd still have access to academic services, to nutrition, to the training room and health services. And we had about around 15 students opt out, although that number is hard to pin down because a couple of them opted out in the fall and have opted back in the spring. Plus the women's basketball team, which elected to opt out as a group. And again, we're comfortable with them making that decision, and we're comfortable continuing to support them. That's it for me, Nina.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Next up is Bob Weissman, our Senior Associate Athletic Director for Facilities and Game Operations, but most importantly, our COVID czar, to give us a COVID management update.
Thank you, Nina. I hope everybody's doing well, and I appreciate your time today to kind of get an update on our response and how we've worked to try to be as successful as possible in this obviously extremely difficult environment. First, this message I think has come through several times, but one of the advantages of getting to see our student athletes every single day when we test is to hear a message from them that a lot of people have spoken about, but it's one we hear every day, and how grateful they are for the opportunity to learn, to compete, and lead, not only in the classroom, on the field, but also to set the precedent for the future if a pandemic ever happened, that this can actually, we can succeed and move forward. So first, just kind of look back on our fall and winter, a rollout and a successful operation in what was a scaled back fall for us as we began to ramp up to a really heavy competition, heavy practice, heavy operation here in the spring. First, as we look to the fall and winter, everything from the start, from planning to actual beginning the operation, was about staying committed to being in alignment with the university in our response and our operations. And that was collaborating weekly since the beginning with President Price, Kyle Kavanaugh, Jennifer Francis, Mary Pat, employee health, student health, and infectious disease, and Dr. Cameron Wolf. That's been at the forefront of everything we've done, and to trying to make sure that we're a good member of this community and we're creating the right environment for our student athletes to learn, compete, and lead. Our initial return started to happen on July 12th with our football program, and then we had several other programs which started to come back there shortly thereafter, leading up to 8/1. It mentioned this because it's important. It's prior to de-densification, to when we had 2 student athletes living in the same room. That was before that change was made on campus. So that initial arrival, or kind of as we like to call it, establishing of our bubble, we had 26 positive student athletes or staff during that period. Post de-densification, so August 2nd, when numbers started being reported publicly, through November 20th, right before the start of Thanksgiving break, our bubble had been established, and we had an incredibly successful fall semester with only 6 positive student athletes that entire 3.5 months, and 8 positive staff. The good news with almost every one of those cases was it was stopped immediately with the case, and there was no secondary spread occurring from them. Also worth mentioning, it's not something that gets a lot of mention in the media or publicly, but we lost 0 games prior to winter break due to Duke-related COVID issues. And with numbers like 6 positives within our student athlete cohort and 8 in our staff cohort, it's no surprise with no additional spread that we didn't have any loss of competition or practice during that period. With the start of Thanksgiving, obviously the bubble broke, and student athletes and staff began to matriculate back to their home environments, and obviously significantly less mitigated environments with significantly less testing. And those numbers, obviously, as we expected and saw throughout the country, increased. We were tracking just to see where we were at and to make sure we were prepared for the spring return. But we had 64 staff or student athletes test positive from the start of essentially Thanksgiving break through January 1st, which is for us, January 2nd was the start of the return of our student athletes. During that period, we had 2 program pauses. Obviously, Chris Kennedy mentioned the women's basketball season opt-out, and we've had a short diving program pause after some positives upon return to the bubble. Our spring return has been successful. We are still in the process of establishing our bubble, much like the rest of campus. We've had 17 positive staff or student athletes from January 2nd to the present. 10 of those were identified upon arrival or within the first couple days when we're in our heavily mitigated environment. 3 of those have been secondary spread, all of which have been captured in quarantine, and so we're not expecting any additional spread beyond that point. And 4 staff or coaches have tested positive in that period. At this point, all of our student athletes have matriculated back to campus, and all indications right now, barring any type of bubble breach or failure to mitigate, are that our bubble will be firmly entrenched and established here by the end of this weekend and early next week. And we expect to be close to 0% capacity on our quarantine and isolation facilities. As we move to the spring, as was mentioned, all of our fall sports will be competing in the spring with the exception of football, who finished their season. So we'll have 26 sports competing and 300 plus competitions. We're committed to no commercial air travel. All travel will be charter bus or flight to really control that environment. We're only going to be competing against teams that meet the ACC Medical Advisory Group's minimum standards. To date, through our fall and our winter, any spread that has happened between teammates and not necessarily between teams. All the information is not in from the winter, so I can only speak at this point to the fall, but throughout the fall, the NCAA has told all the medical advisory groups that there was no known spread on the court or the field. So that's really positive for us in terms of, as long as we control our environments, if we are committed to what we do every day, which is mitigation and testing, that we can make sure that our student athletes stay firm in our bubble, and when they go out to compete, that we can mitigate all the way there, compete where there's 0 to or very minimal risk, and then mitigate on the way back and reestablish ourselves in that bubble. So we feel that we're really positioned to continue our success because of that preparedness and our commitment to mitigation and testing. And to date, everything that we've done has shown that we can not only early identify cases, but really minimize spread with our process and procedures that match those on campus. We've also seen minimal to no impact on the community, the greater Duke community or the Durham community as a whole. And that's because our student athletes, our coaches and staff are all committed to stopping infection and spread. It's something we want to operate. We feel it's important to operate, but we're committed to finding any positive cases and making sure proper procedures are followed so spread stops. We continue to regularly communicate and engage with our student athletes to make sure they feel safe and supported. Another bonus of seeing them every day when we test is we get to check in with them. And part of that communication is making sure, as Chris Kennedy mentioned, that they know they have our full support, whether they opt in or opt out, that we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that this experience is the best as possible for them. In addition to our commitment to our student athletes, we're also committed to keeping as many staff and coaches working remotely as possible to continue to emphasize that de-densification and only bring to campus those that are essential to our operations, and make testing available for those employees as they do come in and out of our bubble to make sure we're creating the safest environment possible for our student athletes. And last, but probably most important, is our ability and our commitment to staying flexible and constantly evaluating the environment that we operate in. We know it's changing. We feel like in our collaborations with the university leadership and student health and employee health, that we're staying at the forefront of any changes that are coming with the virus and the fight in this pandemic, and that we're going to position ourselves well to make sure that we create the safest community as possible. For us, our message, so you know, that we give to our student athletes is really simple. Mitigation matters. It's the only way to stop infection, and testing will slow the spread. And if together we commit to those two things, that COVID will stop with me. And that's something we're really committed to. If we're going to do this and be given this opportunity, we got to make sure our impact on our community here at Duke University and Durham as a whole is handled and appropriate. So thank you for your time today. Nina, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Bob. Next, we have Linda Franzoni, Associate Dean of Undergraduate Education in Pratt and Chair of the Athletic Council, to give you a brief summary on the council's work last semester.
Thank you, Nina. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Athletics Council, it's made up of the following membership categories. We have 7 faculty members, including representatives from Pratt, Law, Fuqua, Medicine, Stanford, and Trinity. We have 5 administrators, including deans from the schools and student affairs, University Council's office, and the executive vice president. We have 6 students, including club sports, Duke Student Government, graduate and professional student councils, student athletes. We have 3 alumni and 2 trustees. And we also have other ex officio members that represent the registrar's office, the financial aid office, Office of Institutional Equity, admissions, and staff from athletics. The executive committee, which is made up of a subset representing each of those categories that I just mentioned, met in October with the president, the provost, and senior leadership in athletics in order to determine the agenda for the 2020-2021 academic year. At that meeting, we identified 4 general categories of interest, and those were COVID, finances, the student athlete experience, and becoming more knowledgeable about collegiate athletics in general. We touched on each of those at our fall meeting, which was held on November 20th, and we will follow up again in April 2021 at our spring meeting. Our general sense from the November meeting was that the athletics department was doing an excellent job balancing the desire to practice and compete with the need to keep players, coaches, and the Duke community at large safe from COVID infections. We were also informed about the financial situation and the stresses on the department from the loss of revenue due to the lack of ticket sales, bowl revenue, et cetera, while at the same time an increase in expenses associated with the COVID safety protocols. I will say that the members of the athletics department have been completely open and honest with us regarding their successes as well as their struggles. And a few interesting takeaways from the meeting that haven't already been said were that athletics launched an aggressive fundraising campaign called It's More Than a Game in order to try to make up for some of the financial losses that occurred this year. And they also piggybacked on the university's hashtag lines, keep teaching for faculty, keep learning for students, and they created their own hashtag, which was keep playing. I think it is also worth noting that this fall, when an athletic competition needed to be rescheduled, it wasn't because of us. At our Athletics Council meeting at the end of November, we also heard from a handful of student athletes because we were curious about their experiences over the fall. They painted a picture of social isolation on the one hand and team bonding on the other. They felt that they had grown closer to their teammates due to the bubbles that they were living in and the activities that were provided by their coaches. They also reported feeling safe, grateful, and supported by Duke. Most of these student athletes had all of their classes on Zoom, which had its pros and cons. The online classes offered them more flexibility in scheduling and fewer logistical problems. The fact that the classes were recorded for viewing later or were asynchronous was another benefit of the online delivery mode. Student athletes who used the tutoring program said having those sessions recorded was very beneficial because they could return back to the recordings to refresh their knowledge when they needed it. The downside was that they didn't have as much opportunity to interact with their professors or fellow classmates compared to taking the classes in person. Now, earlier the same week of the full Athletics Council meeting, we also had Academic Committee, which is a subset of the Athletics Council made up only of the faculty members. We had that meeting with Christoph Gutentag, the Dean of Undergraduate Admissions. Christoph explained that how well he and his staff work with the coaches to vet prospects. Christoph believes that he and his staff have been responsive to the coaches while at the same time recognizing their responsibility to the university as a whole. Christoph interviews all of the men's basketball and football recruits himself as part of the admissions process. And this year he did those interviews on Zoom, which worked out really well for him. With respect to SAT and ACT test scores, this year Duke was test optional for admissions. However, the absence of standardized test scores did not really have an impact on this year's class of recruited student athletes because they usually take their tests earlier in order to become NCAA eligible and to gauge their potential for being recruited by certain schools. However, this upcoming next year, in other words, Christoph is expecting that lack of standardized testing will have an impact on his admissions process for student athlete prospects. This spring, the academic subcommittee, as well as the full athletic council, will each meet again, most likely at the end of the semester in April. And that concludes my report. I hope I made it in 2 minutes. I guess I didn't, but I tried.
Thanks. And last but not least, we'll have Martha Patelis give you a brief update on her role and work as our faculty athletics rep. Martha.
Sorry, I lost seconds by not muting sooner. So I'm, as Nina said, Martha Vitalis. I'm Duke's faculty athletic representative and also psychology and the psychology, a professor rather in psychology and neuroscience. While Linda works with the Athletic Council, I represent President Price and the university to the ACC and the NCAA. So Nina's asked me to give you a very brief updating from that particular world. And three things come to mind. First, starting last spring, and again, it's echoing what you've heard in part, the ACC has worked nonstop to develop its conference COVID-19 response. The ACC Medical Advisory Committee that Bob alluded to was charged with developing the response, the policies and the protocols that the member schools would implement to protect the health and safety of the student athletes. The physician who chairs this committee is none other than Duke's own Dr. Cameron Wolfe. So no surprise that the ACC has fared well relative to other conferences in terms of its management of the virus. Second, nationally, I want to give you kind of an update about a particularly daunting challenge to intercollegiate athletics right now, and that's the potential threat to amateurism posed by name, image, and likeness, or NIL proposals. These proposals you may have read about, they've garnered a lot of attention in the media. They would allow student athletes to monetize their name, image, and likeness through such activities as selling their autographs or being paid, for example, as a social media influencer. Now, several states have already passed their own NIL laws, and rather than have a patchwork of different NIL laws kind of across the country, the ACC and others have lobbied for a federal law to be able to address these NIL issues as a package. And sort of provide a uniform response that conferences could address as they compete across the country. The federal bills drafted by lawmakers last year now have to be reintroduced during the new session of Congress. So while that legal effort is going on, the NCAA also has developed NIL legislation, and that was to be voted on at last week's NCAA convention. There was a great deal of work that went into it over a year of meetings and trying to figure out a task force, what would work, what would be problematic. And literally at the last moment, a day or so before it was to be voted on, the proposal was pulled because of a letter received from the Department of Justice expressing antitrust concerns. That was written by a political appointee, so there's hope that going back now to the Justice Department, that can be worked out. But in the meantime, the NCAA's approach to NIL is on hold. But there's a definite sense of urgency for the ACC around this issue. As Florida's NIL law goes into effect this coming July, and obviously Florida is a big part of the ACC footprint, with both Miami and Florida State being schools represented in Florida. And finally, 2 leadership changes to alert you to. President Price, may have read the Chronicle article, but President Price now serves as vice chair of the ACC Board of Directors, and he's a member of its 6-person executive committee. So it's fortunate for Duke that we have this active voice in the guidance and decision-making in the conference at this particularly critical point in time. And John Swofford is retiring after 25 years as ACC commissioner. And his replacement will be Dr. James Phillips, who will actually start next month. And he is the current AD at Northwestern University. Not only will the new commissioner come from a similar institution to ours in terms of academic profile, but he's one of the many ADs mentored by Kevin White, having spent 4 years working with Kevin at Notre Dame. Back to you, Nina.
Thanks, Martha. With that, Dr. Haney, there's our update. Give it back to you if we want to open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, team. We have time for a few questions before we have to get into executive session. I have Prasad Kasbala.
Hey, thank you, Kevin. Kevin, first of all, thank you for your amazing service. It's been great. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions, one related to the bubble. I had a student athlete in my class last fall who traveled, but turns out the travel was private, and apparently there were a couple of teammates who traveled, and apparently that was allowed. I just wanted to find out if that's still the case, how it impacts the bubble. And my second question had to do with the fact that we still hear troubling reports about myocarditis among athletes, and the extent to which Duke is monitoring it, and how that risk is being taken into account. Thank you so much.
Bob, might you respond to one or both? I don't know if anybody on with us here on this as it relates to this conversation is equipped to talk about myocarditis. I'm not sure, but go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I can give a general answer. I'm assuming the first question you're talking about, we had a group of student athletes, tennis and golf in particular, where they were not allowed to compete as teams in the fall, but they were allowed to compete as individuals. So we had developed protocols in conjunction with campus to make sure that they could, if they departed the bubble, there was protocols for return. So they basically would have to come back, test, quarantine, and were not allowed to reestablish until they had a negative test. And then the next 7 days, which included daily testing for them, they had to be masked and distanced in all activities around other people. So that was kind of the parameters. It worked really, really well for us in the fall in terms of reestablishing people, because in addition to that, as we all know, there are times when life events happen, family emergencies, where students had to depart. So that was the same procedure we would use in that case. And that's actually the procedure we've used here in return for the spring. It helped us develop those protocols for kind of reestablishing our student athletes. The second one, I'm not medical professional, so I do not want to speak in too much detail, but I will tell you that our athletic medical team, our chief medical officer, Dr. Ned Amendola, Dr. Cameron Wolf, and the cardiac teams are in close contact at all times. We have a strict return to play protocol post positive case that everyone follows, and that our doctors review, and they are not permitted to return to play until that has happened. We've seen minimal impacts to date with regard to that in any of our student athletes, but it's being closely monitored and something we're being as careful as possible about.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Earl Dowell.
Yes, this is a question for Mr. Mosier. In a typical year, if I recall correctly, the expenses for athletics is about 100 million and the income is about 80. What's your current projection for this year in terms of expenses and income?
Our current projections are that our expenses will be roughly 90 to 95 million off of an initial budget of 120. And our revenue, I mean, our actual operating revenue will be in the neighborhood of 50 to 55 million. I'd have to go back and look exactly at what it was. But that's the numbers as we know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me, at this time, thank the team from athletics for coming and being with us today in this very informative and helpful presentation. Kevin, Nina, Troy, and Troy, I should say, is from the class of 2000, so he's an alum. Heather, Mitch, Bob, and our own Linda Franzoni. Thank you all for that very helpful presentation. And if we get additional questions, please submit those to Academic Council via email, and we'll pass them along to Kevin and the team for answers. So thank you all for being with us. Appreciate
We'd
it.
be happy to respond to any questions. Thanks, Kerry. Thanks for having us. Thanks.
Thank you,
thank you.
Gary, and thank you for making me younger there. I appreciate it.
Okay, good to see you. So now we'll move into executive session for a financial update. And executive session is reserved for only members of the faculty. And so members of the press and non-faculty members should leave the meeting at this point.